Hello and welcome to Take Control of Your Liberty with Scott Tregurtha, where we help critical thinkers by giving you the most true and accurate information we can find, which they should be giving you on mainstream media, but are not. So you can decide for yourself and take control of your liberty, your freedom, and your future. And now, here is Scott Tregurtha.
Today's guest is Tony Papert, who is going to share his knowledge based on his 50-plus years of political activism regarding who is the true enemy of our country. Welcome, everybody. As I just mentioned, I have Tony Papert with me today. Tony is a leader of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, has over 50 years of political activism under his belt, is author of many articles, and host of numerous YouTube presentations. Today, Tony is going to impart his knowledge regarding who our actual enemy is. And by that I mean the enemy of our country, our Constitution, truth in general, free speech, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'll tell you something. It's not Russia, it's not China, and it's also not Biden, the Democrats, or the so-called liberals. Although Biden, the Democrats, and the so-called liberals are useful idiots this enemy uses, what we're talking about today are those antisocial personalities who are behind these useful idiots and directing them. And Tony is going to go into their history, how they came to be, and what to do about them. And two final points to make before I put Tony on. What this enemy is doing is absolutely intentional, and if we don't change the path we're on, we're in for a very feudalistic future, where they will be the royals and the lords, and we will be their serfs. No, thank you. Hey, Tony, how you doing?
Good, Scott. Great to talk to you again.
Great to talk to you again, too, and I really enjoy listening to your classes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Here's where I'm going to start, because there are so many ideas out there as to who's causing all the trouble in the world. And like I was saying to you earlier, you ask a million people who's behind everything, and you'll get a million different answers. So in an article you wrote recently, what Putin and Xi are really talked about. And you say in there, after a mortal struggle lasting a quarter millennium, our oldest permanent enemy now hopes to use our own foolishness to destroy us at the hands of Russia and China. This is the background to the meetings of Putin and Xi. If you understand...
This was when they met in Moscow a few weeks ago.
Exactly. And then at the end of it, and then you say, if you understand this, throw all your support behind President Trump and his efforts as the only leader who can prevent it. So the first thing I want to ask you about that statement is, who is this oldest and permanent enemy?
Our oldest and permanent enemy is empire. As far back as we know human history, there was empire. And, as far back as we know human history, most people in most of the world have been subjects of empire or slaves of empire, which is pretty much the same thing. The empire goes, I'm not saying it goes back to the beginnings of mankind. We don't know, at least I don't know that. But recorded written history goes back, I think maybe 3,000 years or so. And all the written history we have shows the existence of empire. We know of the Sumerian Empire. Not that empire was all there was. It wasn't. But we know of the existence of empire way back from the Sumerian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, which followed it, the Persian Empire, which was a spin-off of the Babylonian Empire, the Roman Empire, Venetian Empire, the Dutch Empire, the British Empire. So, there has been empire throughout the historical record. And, its current form is the British Empire. It's the British worldwide empire, which is a financial empire and manifests its control through central banking and central banks and the world monetary system. I mean, also, you could say going all the way back to the Sumerian Empire, which is furthest back we can go, I think, that empire always involved a monetary system, a usurious monetary system, and the value of money. But also we can go back to ancient Greece, but even before known ancient Greece, we can go back to ancient Egypt, a faction within ancient Egypt, and find that there was what became the Republican struggle against empire. I mean, the United States was the first nation explicitly founded to be a free republic. I mean, other nations in history certainly, took on the characteristics of free republics. But the U.S., I think, as every American knows, was the first time a nation was actually established with that end. But notwithstanding, that there was no nation established to be a republic until 1776, if you want to take that date, that as far back as Plato, but even before, we find the struggle among men against empire, in fact, to create a free republic, which was the struggle of Plato's life. I mean, this is not only documented in his great dialogue called The Republic and other of his dialogues, but also outside his literature, outside his writings per se. He also tried in his life to actually bring into being a republic in Greece, like what the United States would become over 2,000 years later. He was trying to do that, believe it or not. And this is chronicled in his letters. So our oldest enemy, the oldest enemy to which I was referring in that article, is empire. It's been our enemy from long before the settlement of North America.
Got it. So it's actually the mindset of those who want an empire and want to control everyone.
It's not only a mindset, but it's a historical continuity. On a wall of the Library of Congress, at least one of their branches when I was there decades ago, they had a genealogy which traced the genealogy of the British royal family, led by King Charles the Idiot, who was about to be crowned or coronated. But he wasn't, of course, king then, but they traced the genealogy of the British royal family to the kings of Babylon. So they believed it. It's not just, it is a mindset, but it's not just a mindset. They believe they are the heirs of the emperors. I should have said emperors rather than kings. The emperors of Babylon, and they believe they are the heirs of the doges of Venice, which was the leaders of the Venetian nobility, the Venetian princes and princesses, which were the leader of the Venetian Empire. I mean, back Queen Elizabeth, of course, was queen until recently. She would visit Italy, she would visit Venice, and she would curtsy very low to a Venetian princess, I don't remember the name, who she considered to be the leader of the empire, the Venetian Empire, which became the British Empire. But before it was the Venetian Empire, it was the Roman Empire. Because, I mean, everybody knows Rome was overrun by people they called barbarians, although they themselves were worse barbarians. And they fled into the swamps of Venice. The noble families of Rome fled into the Venetian lagoons where they figured the barbarians wouldn't be able to get them, and founded the Venetian Empire as the continuation of the Roman Empire. So you could say it's a mindset, but it's also a historical project that the world shall be subject to empire.
Got it. So yeah, it's not just a mindset. It's obviously it's a real structure. It's an organization really that keeps being passed down from generation to generation, taking different names and forms.
Yes.
But it's
yes.
But it's always one form it's always taking is the control of the populace, correct?
Yes. Their view is that most human beings are really just a kind of talking animals or smart animals who are just the way, we subjugate the domestic animals and livestock and so on. I mean, we may have some concern for their feelings or something like that, but in general, our view is that they exist for our benefit, not their own. A vivid example of that is the population policy of the British royal family, which has been explicitly their policy for over 100 years, perhaps longer, but at least about 150 years. The British royal family has pursued the project, well, two projects which are related. One is eugenics. They were the ones who formed the British Eugenics Society, which took over UNESCO. And basically, the British Eugenics Society was the origin of the Green Project, as in the COP 21, the Paris Accord, and all this stuff. That originated with the British Eugenics Society, which believed in the herd, as we do with livestock, and removing from the human family people they considered to be inferior through humane methods such as sterilization. And as Bertrand Russell, who was a member of this faction, said, some methods which may be disgusting, even if they are necessary. So they believed in using these methods to cull the herd, to reduce the world population by removing the inferior or the most inferior, because they basically consider everybody as inferior to them. But, there are more inferior and less inferior. And they wanted to rid us of the most inferior through the project of eugenics. Then when Hitler, this was a group, I can talk about it more, but Bertrand Russell was a prominent member. H.G. Wells was a prominent member. All these were, Russell, of course, was a British lord. He was a member of the British oligarchy. H.G. Wells considered himself a member, well, he doesn't consider himself, he was a member of the servant class, which is just about the lowest class in Britain. His parents were actually house servants. But he was admitted, to serve the oligarchy as basically, a privileged lackey. So, he founded this thing, and then Aldous and Julia Huxley, the grandchildren of Sir Thomas Huxley, who was again an intellectual house servant for the British oligarchy. These were the founders of the British eugenics movement. And then when Hitler gave a bad name to eugenics, they couldn't use the name eugenics movement anymore. So they called it the ecology movement, which is what it's called today.
Got it.
I would just say, I was on one of these Zooms, which you referred to, and somebody quite honestly said, "You're saying the British Empire controls the United States? I've never heard anything like that. I've never heard such a thing." And it's true, because, now in the internet age, and we read about all the internet censorship, the ruling oligarchy has the ability more than at any other time to just wipe out all the information and have people start anew and, only read books which were written over the past 5 years or the past 2 months. this is why Tucker Carlson said recently, apropos his being fired by Fox, I suggest people get and read hard copy books because they won't be erased tomorrow morning. I mean,
Exactly.
Americans were not only so forgetful. I mean, it's no coincidence that we're only here because we won a bitter, bloody struggle against the British Empire, the greatest military force which ever existed in history. And that struggle didn't just end in 1781 at Yorktown. It continued, very importantly, it continued into the Civil War, where it was London that raised up the Confederacy against us. They were the ones who financed the Confederacy. I mean, in its very economics of its existence, it was an extension of London, because what the Confederacy did was grew cotton, which was sent to London in exchange for whatever London would provide to them. It was strictly, its whole survival was in relationship to London. And London roused up the Confederacy against us in the hope that they weren't able to defeat us in the 1700s, but they hoped through this means that in the 1800s, they could defeat us, not wipe us out at one fell swoop. But their hope was that the faction of General McClellan against Lincoln would succeed in launching negotiations between the Union and the Confederacy. You'd have a ceasefire, a treaty, and then what was the one unified American republic would be divided in two. And why not divide it in three or four? I mean, we have today projects for the secession of California, but that's not new. There were such projects going way back. Divide it in two, divide it in three, create out of a unified USA a bunch of struggling petty states, which Britain would run as it ran the petty states of Europe at many times in history. So, this was the struggle of our existence. It didn't end with the Civil War either. And Americans of, very recent generations in the 20th century knew this perfectly well. I mean, I was just rereading a book called Grand Improvisation by Derek Liebert, which is a lot of interesting information. I can't vouch for everything he says. But he records that when Winston Churchill came here in 1946 and gave the Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri, an Iron Curtain has fallen over Europe, but basically summoning the United States to a long struggle against Russia and communism, there was a huge outpouring of letters to President Truman. Thousands of letters within just a few days of that speech, many of them simply addressed Truman, Washington, D.C. And what the writers said is, America has to keep its distance from the British Empire. They said, we went to war to save them in 1916. We went to war to save them in 1941. We're not going to go to war again to save the British Empire. We refuse. And that wasn't so long ago.
And these letters exist where one could actually find them and read them, correct?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you see. And a lot of in fact, almost all of what you're saying here can be researched and looked up.
Sure enough. I mean, for one thing is that, a lot of places, that book of Derek Liebert. I mean, this was widely known. I mean, Henry Ford, had a lot of wrong ideas, even though he was a great genius. But one idea he had, which wasn't rotten, which was just that we've shed our blood in the 20th century to protect the British Empire. We're not going to do it. We refuse.
And that's a good thing, for sure.
Yeah.
And you know what? This isn't real to a lot of people, okay? Because
I know.
And and I know, and a lot of us know. But because it's just not put on the mainstream media or even on our conservative stations.
It's just incredible, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well, one big way these guys run everything is they own the media or they control the media. Okay.
And then you have education, right?
And that, yes.
So-called education where, I mean, it's just where it goes from university. I mean, you see it with, all the fads which go on in university. I mean, it's an extreme now when they have, transgender fad, critical race theory fad, one fad after another. And basically, the inclination is to throw out. I mean, I read in one university, now they have a new regulation. Classic students don't have to learn Latin or Greek anymore.
Right.
So you don't have to learn anything but the most recent fad. And then universities are graduating the people who will teach the kids, in university, but also in high school and in grade school and in kindergarten. And all they know is the latest fad they were taught in the university, and that's all they know how to teach. They don't know anything else.
That's right. And the American public and the worldwide public, but more immediately the American public, has been indoctrinated with all this basically fake news.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm a baby boomer. You're a baby boomer. We were indoctrinated. It wasn't as bad then, but this is when all the drugs started getting introduced into the schools and so on, right? Back when we were kids. But the thing is, regardless of how unreal it could look, first of all, it's all verifiable. It can all be looked up.
Yes, correct.
Secondly, though, that's even easier, take a look around. Look at what's happening. Is it not what they're doing? Does what they are doing and manipulating us into, would that not lead us into extermination of our race? For example,
it's most clear in the green pestilence.
Exactly. So you've got the transgender stuff, right? That's going to limit population growth. You've got the new Green Deal or the Green New Deal, whatever they call it. I think Trump named it the best, the Green New BS or something.
I think he's got even more negative titles, but I can't remember them right now. And it can't be negative enough. The British royal family wants to reduce the population of the world, which has just reached 8 billion, I believe, back to 1. I mean, so like they say at West Point or someplace, look at the guy on the left of you, look at the guy on the right of you, look at the guy in the front, look at the guy in the back. None of them will graduate. It's much more serious if you listen to the British royal family, which runs this green ecology nonsense. Look at the 7 people seated next to you. All of them will die. Only one will be left under the green British plan, which was conceived of, in the period around 1900, in the late 1890s. They didn't conceive of it to help the environment. They conceived of it in order to reduce the population. That's the real purpose. All the stuff about carbon dioxide is just made up claptrap by scientists who were paid to lie. There's no truth in it. Carbon dioxide is the most beneficial thing there is. It's plant food. It's all nonsense.
Right, exactly.
It's a complete lie.
Our environment needs it.
Is to reduce, exactly. The purpose is to reduce the population, because what is humanity? I mean, how has humanity built itself up from mud, from the caves, through fire? That was our first invention. This is the story of Prometheus, who brought man fire and raised him up from being an animal, in effect, through fire. I mean, it means physical fire, which we use for so many things, cooking. I mean, fire, the mother of all arts, as Aeschylus called it in that play, Prometheus Bound. Fire, the mother of all arts, meaning arts, scientists, everything, sciences, you name it, fire. And what does the ecological pestilence say? Fire, don't use fire. Don't use fire. Don't burn fuels. Go to wind power, solar power. These are just nonsense. This is, I mean, wind power is such a primitive form of energy. It's hardly ever been used by mankind, except in windmills. It's absurd. And solar power similarly. Solar power, is the most primitive because it's the most diffuse. The amount of energy per unit area is so small, it's insane. There's no way you can support modern civilization. And if you want a proof of that right now, I mean, Biden is trying to work it through. Many hearers know this, I'm sure. Biden is trying to get a regulation somehow that no gasoline cars will be sold in the U.S. past 2035.
That's right.
No gasoline cars. Now, the head of Fiat Chrysler, Stellantis, I forget the guy's name, but he just recently said, well, you can decree that no gasoline cars will be produced by 2035, only electric cars, and people can do that. But the amount of the rare metals, lithium, cobalt, other metals, the amount of the rare metals needed for the electric cars is much greater than we can produce even by 2035. You can limit car production to electric cars, but it means the numbers of cars produced will be minute compared to present car production. We can produce all electric, but the number of cars will be far, far fewer. Well, the people who are pushing it know that perfectly well. Under their new order, you're not going to have a car. Right. You're going to walk. You're going to take your electric bicycle through the snow. You're going to be limited to a small radius from around your house, like a medieval peasant. I mean, like a medieval peasant who in his whole life, which, maybe 25 years is all he gets to live under the circumstances he lived in, and that we will in the future if these guys have their way, he's not going to get beyond his village during his whole lifetime.
That's right.
And what does that mean? He's not going to learn to read or write, no modern medicine. And what does that all mean? It means a world population collapsing to 1 billion. Although, these guys imagine you can collapse population to 1 billion and have some kind of stable, idyllic, state of peasant idiocy, but it's completely untrue. Once you start collapsing it, you're going to have great epidemics, and
right.
You're not going to stop at 1 billion on the way down.
Exactly. And to anyone who feels this stuff is unreal, again, just look at what's happening. If they continue doing what they're doing, the drugs are getting released into the public, killing people. We're cutting down on our energy, so on and so forth. You couldn't draw up a better plan to reduce population than what's going on right now. Pushing the abortion, pushing the transgender stuff. So, without having to try to believe and totally admit all that is true, which maybe a person has no business doing right now unless they research it themselves, right? But just take a look. If doing what we're doing, will that or will that not lead us to destruction? Yeah. I say it will, and I say those who can't see that it would, well, I don't know what to do with them. But
it's worse than that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So basically, here's a big question that people ask. Why would this empire or any empire want to reduce the population to so little people and have all this war and destruction and death? Why would they want to do that?
I think to begin to answer it, what they most fear is, frankly, thinking people. It's our intellect, it's our brains that are the strength of human beings, obviously. Other animals excel us in speed, in strength, in sharp teeth, sharp claws, in sense of smell, sense of sight. Other animals exceed us in all these ways, but we are superior because of what is uniquely human, which is our intellect, our soul, if you want to call it that. our reason, divine. The divine in man is what makes us superior. The divinity in man, which is his reason, his soul. Now, I mean, that in its practical, everyday life, that makes us to superior to all beasts. But it also what makes us threatening to oligarchs and imperialists. They don't want thinking people. They don't want science because it's a potential threat to, and then increase of population is connected with improvements in agriculture. I mean, in other words, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? An increase in population requires better agriculture or, better tools, better economy. All these things are made necessary by an increase in population. And, conversely, when you have more people in mutual commerce, exchange, intercourse, exchange of goods, exchange of ideas, and the most important thing about the exchange of goods may be the exchange of the new ideas which are embodied in the goods. Like, example, an automobile, right? I mean, when you start selling automobiles into a country which doesn't have them, then people become aware of the automobile, question how it works, how can we do this, fix it, you get an advance because people are using a product involving more advanced technology. So population increase accompanies inventions and so on, and the use of the mind and a threat to oligarchy. It may not be completely adequate, but the phenomenon as such is true, and I can show that. And the best, to my view, the best proof to me is the Homeric cycle. Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, as people know it. But when you look at it more deeply or more broadly, the Iliad and the Odyssey were only two works from a larger work written by various authors, roughly the same time, let's say maybe 800 BC, something like that, in Greece, broadly speaking, Greek culture. And this broader work consisting of the Iliad, the Odyssey, and a known number of other books. We know their titles, we have some lines, descriptions, we don't have the complete works. The whole thing was called the Epic Cycle. And all of these books together covered the period of the Trojan War around 1200 BC, the process which led into the Trojan War, the war itself, and the events which followed the Trojan War. And one of those epic poems, lost except for some lines and some summaries, was called in Greek Kypria, in English, I guess, Cypria. And the Cypria contained the following lines, which intimately link with the opening lines of the Iliad. And what they say is, roughly, I'm just saying this from memory, they say roughly that the earth was inhabited by men, and the men kept multiplying and increasing their number. And the earth was oppressed by all the men pressing in on it, the excessive numbers of men. And the earth groaned out to Zeus and said, I'm being oppressed by having too many men, too many people. So Zeus took pity on the earth and arranged the Trojan War to kill off the excess numbers of mankind. Now, if you connect, I'm not going to do it here for time reasons, also maybe from memory, I couldn't do it that well. But if you connect that to the opening lines of the Iliad, which are very, well, I will make one connection. I mean, the opening lines of the Iliad, as we have it, say, sing goddess the wrath of Achilles, which threw numerous heroes into Hades. And then it says, but the plan of Zeus was being fulfilled. And thinking of that, what was the plan of Zeus? maybe somehow you say it's implicit. It doesn't say what the plan was. It just says that there was this great war and there was huge slaughter. A lot of people were killed, but or Zeus's plan was being fulfilled. What was the plan? Well, if you look at the Cypria, you say, well, that's what the plan was. The plan was, as the Greens today would say it, the plan was to deal with our overpopulation. Zeus was concerned about overpopulation. He wanted to do something about it. As Prince Philip, the late Prince Philip, father of the present king, once said, and readers may know this or not, hearers, but he said, I wish to be reincarnated as a deadly virus so I could do something about the overpopulation problem. You know, along with the other royals, he was a real pain in the ass on this question. He once visited a maternity hospital, I think in the Philippines, and yelled at the women that they shouldn't have babies. So those epic poems say Zeus, but what is Zeus? Zeus is the head of the oligarchy. That's what he is.
Back then, that
it says that, that's what it means. And so my explanation for why oligarchism, empire, wants to reduce population, maybe you can find additional or other explanations, but whatever the explanation is, this has been a persistent trait of oligarchy throughout. Oligarchy as empire, which is the form of oligarchy which we've known since the ancient Sumerian Empire.
Bottom line, though, is whatever the reason, it is. It's true. That's been a trait since time immemorial of oligarchs. Yeah. And on that note,
Venice, the Venetian Empire, they cultivated homosexuality for that reason. I mean, it was the immediate context was that the Venetian oligarchy was concerned. Well, this is slightly different, but the Venetian oligarchy was concerned about the proliferation of oligarchs, too many oligarchs. So they encouraged homosexuality among the oligarchs.
If you just look at what's going on, it will reduce the population. What's being pushed by the oligarchs. It just is. It just will. So that right there is a starting point for anybody who's really interested. You start with that. Will what they're doing destroy a large part of the population, or won't it? And then if you're not satisfied with the explanations, do your research, and you'll find out.
And it's interesting, in what I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Should I stop? Not or?
I was just going to say you could do could do their research and connect the dots. That's all. But go ahead. Right.
No, absolutely. Go back into, for instance, the origins of the green movement, the World Wildlife Fund, UNESCO, the ecological organizations formed by UNESCO. UNESCO was under Julian Huxley, and he was the founder of UNESCO, which in turn founded the ecology movement. Because what Huxley said was that human beings are only one species. We have to think of all the species on the earth, and we can't let human beings proliferate to the point where we would intrude on other species. So, for this reason, we can't have too many human beings lest, we press in on the wolves, the deers, and whatnot.
You're right. No, I get it.
And then you had what was it called? The Worldwide Fund for Nature, which is the big mother organization of ecologism, was formed by Prince Philip of Britain and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. They were the two founders. Now, their immediate interest was, they had immediate personal interest also. They were big game hunters. They liked to go to Africa and shoot, elephants and tigers, and, then shoot these pictures where they're surrounded by, dozens of native coolies and a dead elephant or a dead tiger. And they were concerned that if the natives were allowed to proliferate excessively, they would cut down on the territory required for the lions and tigers and elephants.
Right. So all anybody has to do is look at that, and you can see the idea is to reduce mankind.
Exactly.
I mean, they're giving.
Exactly.
They always do it under the guise of they're doing good, right?
Yeah.
To protect the poor animals and the poor green trees and all that.
Exactly.
But does mankind deserve to exist or not? And does mankind also not have the creativeness to be able to exist and expand and also take care of the environment and the animals and everything else?
No, absolutely. It's absolutely true. I mean, mankind has, you're absolutely right in saying that. I mean, mankind has vastly improved the environment. I mean, we've vastly increased the amount of green life in the world through our agriculture, and not just that, forestry and all the kinds of things we've done. I mean, and I mean, we've created all kinds of new species, which are better than the old species. I mean, mankind, this notion of natural nature and something good about natural nature is just all wrong. I mean, look at California. They have these, and not only California, nearby states too, they have all these terrible wildfires. Why? Because they stopped the forestry. I mean, what forestry was going in, pairing the forest, reducing the dead growth, reducing the amount of dry tinder in there to preserve the forest. And they said, no, you're intruding on nature. Plus, we don't want to spend the money, so stop doing it. And the forest burned down, and not only wild animals, but people get burned to death in forest fires in the West for the reason of lack of forestry, well-known forestry practices to preserve a forest, as Trump pointed out. I mean, when he was president.
A very good example. Now, so our major enemy, the enemy, is empire, and lately it's the latest is the British Empire,
the British financier empire.
Yeah. That's even better worded. And I've also been hearing people like even Alec Jones saying it's the modern British Empire. I mean,
he's right.
Yeah, he's got that awareness, and more people are becoming aware of that. And all it is,
it's true.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but all it is, it sounds a little unbelievable. What do you mean the British Empire? That was back in the revolutionary days and so on, right? But literally, could you not simply say, the British Empire did not stop trying to exist and expand at the end of the Revolutionary War. They merely continued.
By no means, absolutely.
They just
continued.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They continued into the Civil War and created that here, and they continue to Nazi Germany, and they continue to this present day with all the wars we've been putting up to within our lifetimes,
exactly,
and so on.
Exactly.
And it's just a continuation. If you look back, all it is continuing. Now, how do we, and you used a good word there. You included financial in that. What are the ties between, let's say, the royal family, the British, not meaning the people, the government, between that and the finances? For example, Wall Street and the City of London and the Bank of England and so on. What are these ties there?
Well, the Bank of England is part of a continuing imperial central bank, which existed because, like I said, you had the Venetian Empire of the early, the first millennium AD and plus, as the continuation of the Roman Empire, and that was centered in the Bank of Venice. The whole thing was centered in the Bank of Venice. And what you have in these financial empires is the independent central bank, like the Federal Reserve. The independent central bank independent from government and superior to government in the Bank of Venice, and then the Venetians decided to move the seat of empire, the same empire, to the north, to Amsterdam, to Holland, to Amsterdam, and to London. And of course, we had the so-called Glorious Revolution, 1688, a Dutch invasion of Britain and placing the Dutch monarch William William and Mary on the British throne, and bringing the Bank of Amsterdam to create the Bank of England, which continues today. And the Bank of England is the center of the city of London, which is the world financial center, to which Wall Street and the Federal Reserve are branch offices for the city of London, along with financial center of Paris and every central bank. I mean, as Bob Ingram has pointed out in his books and in his courses, the British forced independent central banks onto other countries during the late 1800s into the 20th century, where we had the Federal Reserve forced down on us by the British through British figures in Wall Street. We got a central bank, independent central bank, on the heels of almost every other nation was forced into this system of British central banking and a world British dominated or British monetary system, which still persists today. I mean, it doesn't persist in a straight line, but we have today a world British style monetary system headquartered in the Bank of London, the International Monetary Fund, with branches, offices on Wall Street, and every place. I mean, a lot of places around the world. One single world monetary system based on the fetishism of money, that it's money that has value, and that real economic value must be sacrificed for the sake of the value of money, as the Fed is doing today in its interest rate increases, which are sacrificing the economy for the sake of money, for the sake of monetary parameters.
Well, right. Real wealth comes from production, right?
Yes.
And they are cutting down on production.
Yeah, exactly. And real wealth exactly. And real wealth comes ultimately from the mind, from invention. I mean, because everything we're producing today, is based on an invention, an original discovery at some point. And its continuation depends on the new discoveries of the future, because you cannot just keep reproducing the old. That destroys itself. It runs down. You in order to produce it all, you have to be producing the new. You have to be making new improvements on production. And the source of that is the human mind. So, I mean, yes, the source of wealth is value and not money. And the source of the value produced by wealth is ultimately the human mind. But of course, these people deny it. They don't recognize it. I mean, in principle.
In principle. But they seem to know what to do to suppress the human mind.
Well, they haven't succeeded yet.
No, but they're working on it through the dumbing down of our population, through our school systems, and so on. And teaching us, literally putting our attention on stupid things. I mean,
It's also worth noting, I mean, go back just to, the people. I mean, I was very struck by the person, as I told you, who called in or wrote in when I was doing a Zoom and said, I've never heard this idea that the British, that's outlandish. But just think back to Russiagate. And where did Russiagate start? Christopher Steele, a British spy. He was the guy who, I mean, actually, we've exposed in a paper you can get on our site, LaRouchePac.com, called Robert Mueller is an amoral, what is it called?
Assassin.
Anyway, you can look it up, Robert Mueller, an amoral assassin. Robert Mueller is an amoral assassin. All of Russiagate started from Britain, that the British wrote to Washington in 2015 saying, we think there are Russian influences, on Trump. And then, so that launched the whole thing. Then they came in with a Steele report, which everybody knows, I think, was from a top British spy, Christopher Steele, who was their top agent in Moscow, but he was exposed and had to leave, who basically invented a whole bunch of lies about Donald Trump and Russia, which completely dominated the first 2 years of his administration. And they didn't stop there. They just kept going.
And they still are going.
And they still are going.
Right. So literally these British oligarchs, okay, or just worldwide oligarchs, they basically are tied up into our Federal Reserve, correct? They pull the money strings there, correct?
Yeah, right.
And from
the
there,
Federal Reserve is a private, right.
Yeah, it's private. It's
right,
not
right.
even constitutional, and it's not part of our government. But they basically, they loan money to our government and so on. That's a whole other story.
That's just incredible. Yeah, I mean, the Constitution says Congress shall coin money and regulate the value thereof. But look at your money. Who coined it? The Federal Reserve. Who regulates it? The Federal Reserve, not Congress, as the Constitution says. A private outfit prints our money and regulates its value.
Right.
And, I mean, it's not unreasonable to, I'm not saying cause, but to connect the assassination of John Kennedy with the fact that under his administration, the Treasury began issuing currency.
That's right.
Rather than Federal Reserve notes, like all the bills in your pocket, if there are any, say Federal Reserve note, he issued ones that said Treasury note.
Exactly. And there are many books on that, and it's a whole other great big topic. But basically, these oligarchs are tied, and central banks are tied into the Federal Reserve. So literally, if we got rid of the Federal Reserve and replaced it with something much better, which is per our Constitution and what Alexander Hamilton originally put into place, we could be on our road to recovery, correct?
Yeah, exactly. A national bank, exactly. A national bank issuing credit or the equivalent. I mean, Lincoln did this without the form of a national bank, and so did Roosevelt. But a national bank or the equivalent issuing credit for production, for especially emphasizing, infrastructure to be, built, by under the auspices of the federal, but also more often state governments. But credit for production, emphasizing increasing the technology and capital intensity of production generally. In other words, credit for the leading edge of production, which will introduce technological advancements in production as a whole, and also projects like the space program, which is, I mean, some people think, we throw away money into space, but the space program was responsible for the advance of economy during that period of, the 60s through the early 70s, when so many innovations were brought into our economy. So many discoveries were brought into our economy from the space program, like computerization, miniaturized computers, printed circuits, the whole damn thing.
No, right. So that's a good summation of what a national bank would do. Now, that's, of course, a whole other topic, and a lot of people don't have an understanding of what that would be. And one thing it's not is some sort of socialistic thing, okay? When people hear national, they get worried about that. What it is what our forefathers, Alexander Hamilton, put into place. And And I am going to do another podcast entirely on that, so people can
Great.
look forward
Terrific.
to that. Yeah, because
Oh,
that
wonderful.
deserves a lot of explanation. But the bottom line is, you get rid of the Federal Reserve, and you cut off the head of the snake. You get
Yes, exactly.
you get rid of the oligarchs, literally, because that's where they all congregate and run things in this country. And
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, there are
Very
other
much so.
organizations around the world. We have a Federal Reserve here. There's other equivalents around the world. But that's another topic. But the thing people should keep in mind is we get rid of that. We need to have attention on that. Getting rid of that
Yeah, good.
and replacing it with something that works.
Very, very good.
Now,
As we had, not that we had it continually, we didn't, but as we had in periods before the Federal Reserve, as in the administrations of Washington and Lincoln, and when Roosevelt, the Federal Reserve existed under Roosevelt, but he had a Roosevelt ally heading it, and notwithstanding the Federal Reserve, Roosevelt was able to issue federal credit to advanced industry, especially, principally during the period of the pre-war mobilization and World War II.
right, he didn't call it a national bank, but
No, he didn't. Neither did Lincoln.
and Lincoln was the Greenback program.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. The Greenback program and a reorganization of the whole banking system for the effect of, in effect, as though we had a national bank.
Right. And people keep trying to get this like Hamilton did, but even back then, the same kind of people that are trying to keep that out of here got it out of there then. They did away with it, right?
Eventually, yeah, Jackson did away with it.
Yeah, so Jackson was one of, he was one of the bad guys. Now, where does Trump enter into this? He says, they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just standing in their way. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Trump, he knows a lot of what we're talking about here.
Yes, he does. Exactly how much, I'm not in a position to say, but clearly he knows a lot of it, or perhaps all of it.
And he's a threat to Federal Reserve and these oligarchs, just like Kennedy was. But instead of assassinating him like they did Kennedy, they're attempting to assassinate him politically.
Correct. He represents because our government has become completely captured by the British financial empire of Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, Obama. Worse and worse, really. It's all the way downhill. Obama was a complete British puppet. And then, the plan was to succeed him by Hillary, who was a total mindless British zombie puppet. So, the government came to be really at complete loggerheads with all the interests of the American people. They stripped our country of almost all its industry. It's just unbelievable what was done. And Trump stands up for the basic interests of the American people. And I think, given the support he's gotten, the way he's really won the heart of a majority of our population, he seems to understand better and better what has to be done to recreate America in its founding principles. And so, this oligarchy is determined to stop him, obviously.
Obviously. And that's why we need to stand behind him and get him reelected again. So, yeah, that's pretty much all the time we have. And I thank you very, very much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Your information is extremely valuable.
I would like to direct people, to our website, LaRouchePact.com. We have a Zoom class every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern, and a strategic update every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. And you can read a lot of what we're discussing on our website.
Exactly. You can learn even more there. And we'll be doing more shows on the Federal Reserve, the National Bank, and Trump's Agenda 47. So
Terrific.
Thank you again, Tony, and you have a very good rest of your day.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Sure thing.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
So long.
Bye. Hey, everybody. I thank you all for listening. Please don't forget to click like or subscribe, or just go to takecontrolofyourliberty.com and subscribe there to get our free newsletter and more information on how to take control of your liberty. There is also more information on the LaRouche Political Action Committee and other points of interest under the Resources tab. And in summary, I'd like to emphasize our enemy is the modern-day British financial empire. We can call them oligarchs, globalists, you name it. But more specifically, it's the Bank of England and the large central banks from around the world, which are the true owners of our Federal Reserve and its equivalent in other countries. These guys control the media, are behind the never-ending wars, and are the guys pulling the strings of our useless idiots, which caused the big COVID scare, the lockdowns, illegal mandates, and are after those brave patriots who cared enough to show up at the January 6th protest. They are also the guys trying to get Trump locked up or nullified because he's onto them and standing in their way. And their modus operandi is to get us all fighting each other, Democrats versus Republicans, race against race, and so on, while they sit back and rake in the dough and control the living hell out of us. They are behind the transgender BS, the Green New Deal BS, and on and on. Anything to crush us as a nation and reduce the population of the planet. Our banking system is shot and run by our enemies and can't be revived with a few reforms. The solution for our country is to replace the Federal Reserve with a national bank, as was originally put in place by Alexander Hamilton. In case there is anything you don't understand about this or have any questions or comments, feel free to email me at scott@takecontrolofyourliberty.com, and I'll be happy to answer you. And if I don't have the answer to your question, I'll get it for you. Also, be on the lookout at takecontrolofyourliberty.com for our podcast coming soon, which will be dedicated to replacing the Federal Reserve with a national bank. Until next time, have a free and prosperous week.